Welcome to the Business of Soil Health. I'm Patrick Smith, the founder of Soil Upside.
And I'm Sammy Telleton, the co-founder of FarmRaise.
I'm really excited today to have Lucas Chamberlain and Gillian Chesnut with us. Lucas is a specialist in resilient agriculture at the Delta Institute, where Gillian is an associate in the program side. Delta has a really interesting program that has been running for several years now around soil health and farmland valuation, where they're working on getting soil health metrics incorporated into farmland appraisals. And this is an area where there's a lot of opportunity. Clearly, farmland valuation underlies so much of the financial world in farmland and farm finance generally. So really excited to have you guys here with us today.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks.
Absolutely. Why don't you guys start by just describing your roles at Delta, what Delta does generally, and some of the kind of overview of this project.
Sure. So Delta Institute is a nonprofit organization. We are centered here in Chicago, but we work throughout the Midwest. We work with communities in the Midwest to solve complicated environmental problems. Delta Institute was founded in 1997, and we have three kind of buckets or initiatives of programs that we do. The first, just briefly, is what we call nature-based climate solutions. And these are direct implementation projects, mostly around flood mitigation, installing green infrastructure, those types of things. We have another bucket of programs called sustainability and support services. And this is more like community-led planning efforts. We provide capacity support to municipalities. We also do a good amount of brownfield redevelopment and remediation. But then our third bucket of projects is called resilient agriculture. And as I mentioned, since our founding in 97, Delta's been in the ag space just because in our region, ag is the primary economic driver. So if we're addressing environmental issues, agriculture obviously has to be a part of that equation. And we've done lots of different programs throughout the last couple decades. We've done pay for performance projects working with the federal government, the EPA, USDA. We've been in the ecosystem credit space, creating marketplaces for those. But over the last 10 years or so, we've really focused and centered all of our projects around soil health as an asset. And that is because, and I'm preaching to the choir here, but with the right context, the right practice, we know that these practices can increase net returns, they can lower operating costs, and that they can improve farmers' bottom lines. And when we work with farmers, they often tell us, hey, that's great. I know that no-till and cover crops will have all these great benefits, but I just can't make the business case for it. And so as we've focused on soil health as kind of our North Star and the thing that we're most interested in terms of outcomes, improving soil health in our region, we have really focused on how do we finance the adoption of these practices. And that's what we'll be talking to today about, especially as it relates to land valuation. And I can go more into it if you'd like, but I guess the last thing I'll say is really the logic being that investing in building soil health takes a lot of time, takes a lot of money, takes a lot of capital. So if we can demonstrate that those investments have a return, an actual return, and that can be your increased equity in your land, possibly lower insurance premiums, access to reduced interest loans, then that might lower the barrier that a lot of the farmers that we work with say that they have that's preventing them from adopting these practices.
Are there learnings from your journey in agriculture that led you to this current paradigm? I'm thinking about how you mentioned the pay for performance work, the ecosystem credit and marketplace work, and I'm sure that you learned valuable things that led you where you are now. So can you speak a bit more to that, and why is this now the core thesis or focus of your work?
I would say in my personal life, I have a farming background and also a soil science background, and I have just known from working on farms and working with farmers in the academic space that it really is just all about making the business case. Most, if not the vast majority of the farmers that I've known, that I've worked for, that we still work with, all are very aware of the scientific literature. They're aware of all of the cost share programs that are possible. But like I said, business case, and sometimes these programs can be just too much of a burden for them. So really just trying to put the power into their hands and make the business case and give them financial tools, whether it's through equity financing, debt financing, that they can make these decisions. And yeah, Jillian, I don't know if you have anything you wanted to add from your background there.
Yeah, I would echo everything you say and just kind of underscore that, I've been working in the ag world for the past 3, 4 years now, and there definitely feels like there's a bit of a disconnect sometimes between this idea that farmers aren't adopting conservation practices due to a lack of education in particular, and that I haven't found that to be the case at all. And so, and in fact, as Lucas said, there's a lot of hurdles into getting into some of these well-established programs that are very successful, but the average farmer has a lot going on, and everything is a burden when it comes time to applying for these types of things. So when I came across Delta and found the soil health land valuation work, which is kind of what we refer to this project as internally, I was immediately excited about it because I feel like it's a kind of a different approach than what I'd seen previously to enabling farmers to adopt the practices they want to adopt.
It's sort of a more internal, like focusing on the farm as its own financial engine and ecosystem and what are the levers within that rather than creating maybe external mechanisms to incentivize it.
Yeah. And I would add, or just to expand on that, these cost share programs that have been around for most of our lives are fantastic, but they come and go with different, funding priorities from the federal government. And some of the other, our Delta's experience in these kind of pay for performance programs have been that it's awesome. We get these conservation practices on acres in key watersheds. We have these awesome outcomes, but then the money goes away, and they keep these. They can't stand up on their own. So I think, yeah, Sammy, to your point, trying to create something that is self-sustaining is the key here.
Yeah, and you hit on the key phrase for us, business case. This whole show is about essentially business case and different economic aspects to soil health. So I'm curious if you can tell us more about the valuation program itself. Like, what are the goals? What's the structure? Kind of the overview.
So the overarching goal for this soil health land valuation work, as we call it, kind of hinges entirely on what Lucas said about treating soil health as the basis for all of these other incentive-based methods to increase conservation practice adoption. And specifically, this program aims to prove the hypothesis that soil health can be this financial asset empirically beyond what we know about its benefits through yield data and anecdotally. And beyond this, our long-term goal is to ultimately try to see or help create a market for this soil health.
And what form does that take then? Like, concretely, what does that mean?
Sure, I'll just add to that trying to build a marketplace for that. We have so much soil health data is being collected by farmers themselves, by groups like us. All that data can be traded in a marketplace, can be valued as an asset, or that's what our goal is. And so that data, we believe, can be used by farmland appraisers because they're these neutral arbiters of valuation. They provide this data. They're the verifiers. They're essentially like a firewall of kind of phony data that then is used by underwriters and by lenders to make financing decisions. So our hope is that we can provide this data to these valuation arbiters, and that they can then that verified data can then be used effectively in financing decisions. But the there's kind of two issues where we're at right now is that in appraisals, soil health has to be a measurable characteristic that's supported by standardized and replicable valuation methods. So in the same way that productivity indices are now. And then even if that is accomplished, we need to accomplish broader consensus within decision makers of the financing world, like the lenders, the loan insurance agents, investors themselves, that soil health is something that consistently leads to more profitable, more resilient operations, even more so than business as usual conventional management.
So you said that, your goal is to create a marketplace where soil health is valued. I'm assuming that that doesn't mean creating a standalone marketplace. I'm assuming that means that you'd like soil health attributes to be included in the current market, which, you're talking about at the sale of land, purchase or sale of land. You're talking about during underwriting and sort of asset valuation. You're talking, debt to asset ratios, that kinds of thing.
That's exactly right. Yeah. And if this data, or if soil health as a real asset can be valued, the ultimate goal, even beyond just farmland, buying and selling farmland, our North Star is that can be leveraged in financing decisions, because we know that, it's not every day that a landowner is buying and selling land. We would really love it if a farmer that is adopting these practices is applying for their yearly operating loan, and their lender can consider them as a lower risk borrower because of their management decisions, and give them, a lower interest rate, or perhaps a rebate on their interest payments, or maybe even flexible repayment terms. Anything that can kind of alleviate some of the the stress of razor thin margins that farmers, especially in our region, are operating on. And the current depressed commodity market, input costs keep going up. So anything we can try to shave off is a win in our book.
Totally. Yeah, definitely with you conceptually. And those goals make a lot of sense. So can you talk practically about what this means? Like, what are the constituent parts of the program itself?
In this scope, we're conducting 30 soil health appraisals, which means we're taking 30 plus soil health samples. So we're sampling the individual plots that are being assessed, but we're also taking reference samples, undisturbed sites that we can use for a baseline comparison. And then these soil health metrics are going to be incorporated into the land appraisal, depending on how the appraiser sees fit. And then the farmers obviously get access to this land appraisal data. It's free to them. They also get soil health reports, which is really cool. But in this practical implementation, we come up immediately against this challenge, which is that appraisals aren't conducted in a vacuum. And there's some subjectivity in the process through state and through methodology, but decisions about how much a property is worth, it's ultimately up to this arbiter of the market, which is the appraisal expert. And something we've heard from them, when they're trying to incorporate formally this soil health data into the appraisal, is that their job is to respond to the market. So if there's no market yet for the soil health land valuation methodology, that's a hurdle to cross. And what influences the market is obviously kind of a rabbit hole, but that's why we're working with people from kind of across the market to try to see how we can push the market in a direction that will value soil health as an asset from all our respective places. In this scope of work specifically, we're moving on from the initial just conducting appraisals and incorporating the soil data phase to talking directly to financial institutions, because obviously their lending structure is hugely important to everyone who's looking to the market behavior to determine their next move, especially appraisers. It's the most direct way in this scope of work.
Yeah, I would just add to that practically what this looks like is what, as Jillian was saying, we're in kind of the beginning of a new scope, because what we had done before was work with appraisers and soil scientists to come up with in appraisals, the dominant heuristic of how you understand land values is a productivity index. So what we came up with in these partnerships was a soil health index that is easy to come up with. It's replicable. It can be standardized across soil types, across production types. So that was kind of like the first value add was, let's come up with a soil health index that can just go on an appraisal report so that we can start to create the market that appraisers need to then, react to. So that was really the first thing. In addition to doing these appraisals, seeing what works, it was creating this proof of concept. And now it's this more holistic approach, as Jillian said, now bringing in lenders to see what kind of data they need, expanding our appraisal efforts in different regions, doing more of them. We're doubling the amount that we did in our previous scope that just ended. We're also working with appraisal education experts to create curriculum. And because appraisers do continued education, very often it's part of their professional development. So we're creating training modules. We'll be doing in-person trainings. And then I think the final thing I would just add in terms of this kind of holistic approach to it is also doing roundtables and field days where we bring in farmers, landowners, conservationists, and folks on the finance side. Get everyone together in the same room or at the same field day and talk about what kind of data from the lending or the finance side, what kind of data do you need that would make sense from the landowner side, from the conservationist side. How can we all work together? So trying to, now that we've developed this proof of concept, pushing it out and expanding it and seeing who needs what, and kicking the tires on it.
Very cool. Thank you for getting into that. I'm going to go very into the weeds with you just to make sure that I have the most elementary understanding of the work and who these stakeholders are. And I will own up to something, which is I cannot picture who the appraiser is. So when you're talking about the appraisers, for example, are you talking about the folks doing the sort of third-party valuation of the land that live within existing financial institutions? Or so would I, as an appraiser, live within the institution of Compeer, or am I in a third party to Compeer?
Both.
Okay.
Yes. And that's a really great point that we should clarify on, is that, yes, you're totally right. Banks, lending institutions, they have appraisers in-house. And we're definitely working with them, especially because they, these larger ones that are within the farm credit system, that operate at multi-state levels, that's an opportunity for us to really kick the tires on this and see, what works in Wisconsin may not work in Illinois, yada, yada. But we've also, in our previous scope of work, and we're continuing to now, is we have partnerships with third-party appraisers, as you mentioned, Sammy, folks that are outside of the lending system. They just, they provide their services to finance decision makers. And I'm happy to also say that we've been really lucky with the folks that we've worked with, because all of the appraisers that have partnered with us, that have been on the ground taking soil samples, collecting land management history data, all this good stuff, are also farmers in the area that they appraise in. So they've been able to really
familiar.
Yeah, and they've helped co-create a lot of this work and make sure that it works for farmers as well as appraisers. So we're very happy about that.
That's great. And you're saying that the appraisers will go out and do the soil sampling on the farm?
That's what we did in the first scope of work, which I should mention was in summer of 2024, which feels like a lifetime ago, but that was only last year. Yes, we wanted to get as granular data as possible, and we even created, part of the curriculum that we've created is a soil health testing guide for appraisers. Really easy to understand, what is soil health, why might you be interested in it. But Jillian, do you want to tackle kind of why we might be moving in a different direction from that?
Yeah, sure. I'll talk a little bit about that. Like Lucas said, everybody, the main outcome of all of these scopes of work so far have been, something we've heard from our peers as well, is that everybody kind of needs more data, and especially appraisers, because my rudimentary explanation of how an appraiser decides on the value of land is usually, well, and the methodology I'm most familiar with, the sales comparison approach, is looking at comparable pieces of land and how much it's selling for, how much it could be sold for. And that's how they determine the valuation of the parcel, the subject property. And so when we're asking them to incorporate a soil health score into that valuation, they need all these other data points to be able to really come up with any sort of meaningful number. And to that point, when we started having conversations with more appraisal firms and individuals, asking the appraiser to also take the soil sample during this whole process is it's kind of a lot. They have a whole other job, right? And especially because I'm not a soil scientist, and I haven't spoken to an appraiser in this project yet who is either. And even though taking a soil sample, as Lucas mentioned, we did come up with a guide, and there are easy replicable methods, it's still time consuming no matter what. So something that we're kind of coming up on right now is that we really we need to weave this soil health data together in sort of like a plug and play platform for appraisers and lenders, and ultimately farmers as well. And to do this, it's interesting because a few other people in this space are also working on something similar, like a platform where people can share soil data. But all of these are currently proprietary, right? Because they've got farmer data, which obviously that should be private. And then also they've got their own methodologies. But we really want to weave our work into something existing that is public. So appraisers can access this data and use it independently of us. So all that to say, we haven't quite totally worked out yet who's going to be doing the soil testing, but we're going in the direction of it not just being on the appraiser.
That makes sense. I appreciate how you're iterating and the evolution based on what you see, especially because it sounds like you're going from 30 appraisals done in the first phase to 60 plus done, right? In the next phase.
Actually, just to clarify, it was 15 in the first phase,
and then
30 next summer. Yeah.
Okay.
Which may not
So
sound like a lot, but these appraisals, they do take a lot of time. They're quite expensive, and part of this program, maybe we should have mentioned if we didn't, is that any of the participating landowners, the incentive for them to participate in this and let us, go and sample their soils is that their appraisal is totally free for them, and they get a comprehensive soil health report that compares their soil health to a regional baseline and to their neighbors and all that good stuff.
I'm curious. So what I'm understanding is that you have the appraisers going at least in prior phases. You have the appraisers going out and collecting soil health metrics. We'll talk in a second about what those metrics are, and incorporating them into their appraisals themselves. But the appraisers, like you mentioned, Gillian, like they look at comps. Those comps don't have soil health metrics associated with them. So there is, like, in the marketplace world, we talk about a cold start problem where, like, how do you get critical mass on both sides of this? And so is the theory here that you're just going to slowly generate additional data that can be used as a comparison point for appraisers in the future? Or like, how do you get out of that cold start problem?
Yeah. Well, I think so. We are partnering with orgs, non-NGOs, that are currently baselining soil health across the continent. And our partnership with them is, the idea being that because we're not necessarily confined by county databases or even state by state. We're at what's called the Major Land Resource Area scale, or MLRA. And these are large geographic boundaries that just have similar parent materials, so similar soils, similar climatic conditions, and then therefore similar agricultural systems. And the idea being that if you can baseline within one of those MLRAs, then those comps are those parcels are comparable across the MLRA. So, for example, we did in our first scope of work, we did a very large one that covers over 30,000 square miles between Illinois and Iowa. The idea being that soil health that is a benchmark that's taken in central Illinois is comparable, at least in terms of its soil health capabilities, its highest and best scenario, to something in eastern Iowa. So to answer your question, Patrick, the data that exists for this kind of benchmarking at the continent scale. It's really just a matter of navigating all these partnerships and trying to weave it into something that's publicly available. So yes, it is. That's an active issue for us.
So I think what I hear you saying is that using the MLRA approach allows you to create a database that can be used for comps by appraisers with relatively few samples.
Yes. Yeah. The idea is that because these soils are comparable within the MLRA, that if you're looking simply, or not simply, but if soil health index score is going to be an indicator of value, it's going to be factored in the valuation, that those properties would be comparable within the same MLRA, even if they're not in the same county, same neighborhood, same state. And the other thing I would just add is that remote sensing is something that we're looking into. We're very interested in that as well. If we can infer things about your management from remote sensing rather than having to go out and actually take the soil samples, then that would be great. But where we're at still right now in the early stages is actively ground truthing, baselining. What is the highest and best soil health in this region? And then what are some of the farms look like, and looking at different types of management styles as well, seeing how those play out.
That's great. I like this method. It makes sense to me, the way that you all are thinking about it. And also, I'm thinking about the number of times I've worked with individual farmers to think about some kind of decision matrix for profitability and soil health on their farm. And they always, more often than not, farmers will say, my farm is unique and different. I have my own, nuances in it. How will you reflect the uniqueness of my soil and my farm in your tool that you're building? So is that coming up for you? How are you addressing that in the field or with farmers?
One of the things we've done, so we created this soil health index score, which is very just standardized and does not necessarily, it's a simple number. So it may not reflect the idiosyncrasies of someone's management or whatever. What we've also done in the appraisal process, and we're hoping that it continues, we're still kicking the tires on it, but what we did in our previous scope was also a land management history, collection, essentially, so that because in appraisals, they are standardized. They're supposed to be as objective as possible, but there's a lot of room and there's obviously a ton of foundational metrics that are quantitative and that simply just go onto the appraisal report. But there is a lot of room for qualitative data and judgment on the case of the appraiser to be included. So what we did was included areas for commentary and for recording of land management history that was collected from essentially a very brief kind of survey that's included, that gives a little bit of color to the soil health index score as well.
You've mentioned that several times now, and I've held off asking this. Can you tell us what's included in the soil health index and how you all define that?
Yeah, absolutely. It is. So the soil health index score, it was created, like I said, in partnership with the Soil Health Institute and our appraisal partners as well. But it comes from the Soil Health Institute's recommendations for, as I may have mentioned, they are baselining soil health across the continent, across North America. And to do so, they've whittled it down to really 3 soil health indicators. You can add in a 4th, which I can describe here in a sec. But the three, to make it as easy, as replicable, standardized as possible, is total carbon, potentially mineralizable carbon, which is kind of a proxy for microbial respiration, and aggregate stability. So those are the three soil health indicators. They do also say, and we've included water holding capacity in there as well. But those from their, they're the experts on that we've been following. So the soil health index score is very simply just an average of those scores across that gives you a 0 to 1 score. And the way that ratio is built, if you're a subject, if you have a parcel, a field at the field level that you want to know your soil health index score, you would average across your values for those three indicators, or four if you wanted to add in water holding capacity. And that would be the numerator. And then the denominator on the ratio is the indicator values of what we call a reference, or essentially the benchmark or baseline in the area. So within the major land resource area, you would find a pristine, untouched area, a field, or you could even do the fence row of a field. You can do a perennial, an area that has perennial vegetation, something that just hasn't been plowed in the last 10 years or so, will give you that highest and best soil health value. And so it's just a simple ratio of what your field is compared to the highest and best. And I can just say anecdotally, when we did this in Illinois, we saw a large difference, a huge gap between the highest and best, even at a fence row, and then the plowed field that we were in. And then in Michigan, the gap was much smaller because of the amount of conservation practices that were being used there. So we were seeing, evidence of the effects of land management on soil health in real time. And I will also say that all of this is publicly available on Delta Institute's website. So all of the reports, everything that we've done, including all the data, of course, is anonymized, but the results of that are publicly available on our website.
That sounds great. How does that ratio then translate to the economic valuation of the farmland? What is then done to process that information?
Yeah. What we did was take all of those scores, and with hundreds of comparable properties in the areas, we performed regression analyses with, and this is what the appraisers do, that's just their standard methodology, to try to find anything that would give us some idea of, like, is there some kind of hidden market here that people are unknowingly paying for, that there's some kind of inherent desire for soil health that, even though it's not being advertised on appraisal reports. And we did not find anything there because there's no data to reflect that. It's all about the soil productivity index. So that's where we're at right now, is we don't.
Oh, yeah. I was just going to add, the thing that I'm most excited about after this next scope of work is done is to be able to really have enough data. It's not going to be, our effect size isn't going to be perfect, but we can actually correlate what our soil health scores are against the state productivity indices. And I think that's maybe where we could really start to see how it could be incorporated into the appraisal in a more value-based way. And so I'm looking forward to that.
In other words, you think you'll be able to see whether soil health metrics are driving greater productivity than the productivity indices would otherwise indicate?
Yeah, what we're hoping to do is to expand beyond the sales comparison approach of appraisal to try to see if we can utilize what's known as the income capitalization approach in appraisal, which is just gives you an idea of how much profit can be generated from the property that you're going to buy. And that's usually based on yields, which is also informed, or that's what the productivity index is supposed to tell you. That also relates to its rental prices. These things are all, it's a direct correlation. But and But we would love, what we're trying to do is to look at budget analyses and demonstrate that the properties that have adopted conservation practices have improved cash flows because of lower input costs and maybe even yield stabilization benefits there. So if we can demonstrate empirically that these conservation practices are improving cash flows and that can be verified in the income capitalization approach, then we can kind of see if we can split those apart. The only issue with that is that that's very time intensive, and asking an appraiser to do that is asking a lot. So that's kind of where like the friction is right now. But that's how we're trying to get around the issue of there's really not enough market data for us to make some kind of valuation adjustment based on soil health. So maybe we can dive into the books a little deeper and try to tease some of this data apart.
It seems like, yeah, once you start talking about, the income capitalization approach, you're talking about something much more than just incorporating soil health metrics into appraisal reports. And I'm assuming that means something like partial budget analysis, and like you're going, into a lot more detail on the actual operating finances of the producers. Is that included in this next scope of work that you're working on?
That's what we're baking into our agreements with our appraisal partners, but those aren't fully, the ink on those isn't dry yet. And it's going to be, that we expect is going to be a barrier to wide adoption of this kind of methodology. So we're, that's what we're hoping to do as a part of continuing to look at if we can just put the soil health index scores on the advertisement materials that are going up at auctions and whatnot, then maybe we can see some kind of differentiation there. But we are hoping to dig into the operating budgets of the participating landowners in this next phase.
And yeah, Lucas, to your point, I think this next part is a lot about exploring that idea of what type of data is needed for people in the market to make these sort of decisions. And so we're trying to find it all. We're really exploring every option right now.
Yeah.
It's also interesting because I'm curious what form those metrics are expressed on the appraisal. Because if you're just saying, we're going to report these soil health metrics as part of the appraisal, if somebody doesn't have context for what those metrics mean, like, are they bad or are they good? It's going to be a challenge. It's like, what is the mean weight diameter of your soil aggregate stability? Like, who knows what a good metric is on that other than soil scientists? So how are you overcoming that reporting challenge?
Yeah, so we are pretty happy with the way we've been able to visualize it. And you are exactly right, Patrick, is visualizing in terms of mean, median, what are the, a simple graph that visualizes this is where the highest aggregate, this is what the highest aggregate stability looks like in the neighborhood. This is where this farm is at compared to its neighbors. And just, simply visualizing it. And we've included a bit of even 2 to 3 sentences per indicator on the report that goes into the larger appraisal report itself. So, and we're really lucky, like I said, to partner with Soil Health Institute on that because they have a lot of experience making things really easy to understand, visually, eye-catching, and our appraisal partners seem to really like those. So we're hoping that can just be kind of even a template that is, because I should also mention this methodology obviously is not proprietary whatsoever. We want this to be used by anyone and everyone. So as many templates and free resources that we can put out there, that's what we're doing.
And yeah, and in the interest of not keeping this kind of thing gate kept, we're also in this next scope of work working with an appraisal education expert to build a curriculum for appraisers and hopefully get that certified as well so that appraisers can get continuing education credits through that program and participation. They will inevitably learn about this methodology and what these things mean.
So smart. Train the trainers. That's very cool. How many farmland appraisers exist today?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the answer is a lot. But in Illinois, for example, we've really tried to put a number to this when we're trying to think about how many people need to adopt this sort of land valuation appraisal approach in order for it to become more mainstream in the appraisal area. And I think the number we came up with was there were about 3,000 in Illinois, and then fewer than that are certified as like technical rural farmland appraisers. And we're hoping to get around 20 to 30% of those folks coming to our trainings. And it would be great if they would implement the practice on their appraisal sheets as well.
And why that 20 to 30%? What's significant about that?
Yeah, so this is our best guess at what we could call like a tipping point for people who are interested. And that number actually comes from, if you've ever taken a sociology course, you may be familiar with the old diffusions of innovations theory. And that number for this early adoption curve is around 30 to 40%. But since it's just me and Lucas on this, we're going to give ourselves a little bit of grace and we're going to say 20 to 30%.
It's fascinating that you guys are getting inbound demand and feeling market pull from appraisers. I've always assumed that the appraiser side of farmland valuation related to soil health would be on a lagging indicator, not a leading indicator, and that the early adopters would be the folks like Fractal that are arbitraging an opportunity to improve land value where soil health is not actually accounted for in the valuation yet, and where they see a possibility to outperform what the productivity indices sort of indicate. So I'm curious to understand a little bit more about how appraisers are responding to this. And I've always thought about appraising as a sort of commodity service. So can you talk a little bit more about why you're seeing some early adoption among appraisers?
Yeah, I'd say early interest from appraisers. And I think it is that they see the success of, I guess you would call them industry disruptors like Fractal, like MAD, even Iroquois Valley, these groups that have demonstrated that, land management, the right practice in the right place does improve your resilience and that can be represented in cash flows. And so I think that, like I said, the main thing we've heard anecdotally is that this, makes me, if I'm working for an appraisal firm or a lending organization, this makes me stand out and I can position myself as, a conservation minded, progressive lender. I'm interested in protecting the local water quality, of my county. Those types of, not to be cynical, but like PR reasons is really part of it. And then I think the resilience, the evidence that these practices are contributing to overall resilience of farm operations, I think is what folks are catching on to in terms of, insurance payouts. If your yield stabilization or your crop failure, if these are things that are being accounted for on the back end, and if you're seeing that your clients, your borrowers that adopt these practices are less at risk to those things, then you might want to start verifying it on the front end so that when they go through your pipeline, you're aware of those things.
Yeah. I'm curious, thinking about all you've learned and been able to drive with the first scope here. What else do you envision for the future? What else is going to feature in your next scope that you haven't had a chance to mention?
I think we've kind of talked about this, but some of the, we're doing more appraisals, doing lots of field days and roundtable discussions. We are, Obviously, we're creating lots of resources, as we've mentioned several times, co-creating them with appraisal education experts. But the ultimate crown jewel that we're chasing after, that really remains to be seen if we can do it. But other orgs have, other bodies have done this, but have kind of relied on concessionary capital. Is that we would really, the ultimate goal here is that if this appraisal data, if the improved cash flows as a result of adopting these practices can be verified, can be valued, if we can get a independent, standing on its own, loan product, they're equity financed or some kind of debt financing, some kind of financial instrument that uses this data, then we will be overjoyed. And we would love that. Our goal is for that not to rely on concessionary capital or some kind of cost share program. We would love this to exist in the marketplace, and for producers that are adopting these practices to be rightfully viewed as lower risk borrowers and therefore receive those benefits.
That's a great vision. And are you expanding to new regions or geographies?
Yeah. So right now, again, we're continuing that previous effort that we did in Illinois and Michigan, but we're hoping to expand into all of the broader upper Mississippi, Midwestern, Corn Belt region, whichever definition you want to use. And so we're focusing on places like Iowa, Wisconsin, hoping to move into Minnesota as well. And of course, Indiana, can't leave them out. So that's what we're looking at. And what we really want to see as well is whether we suspect this methodology can be used on other types of cropping systems. Places like Wisconsin are of particular interest to us because we've got such high concentration of potatoes, which is a crop that's not currently in our portfolio, and the dairy industry. So hopefully we can head in that direction as well.
Yeah. And I can also say, we've had folks reach out that are also interested in, can this be done on perennial systems? Can this be applied to, because also, I guess it's a back and forth, but we have taken a lot of this foundational, theoretical underpinnings of this, over a decade ago came from the fisheries that have kind of looked at how to value sustainability there, or the timber industry. How can are there lessons learned that we can go back and forth on, looking at different cropping systems in different regions is on the horizon. But right now it's pretty much small grains and very traditional business as usual in the Corn Belt.
Super cool. Really appreciate you guys talking in detail about this program. I'm excited to track it over time and see what happens. So 2 last questions. One is, where can people keep up to date with all the progress? Is there data about the valuations and the soil health metrics? Is that publicly available? So let me just ask that question first.
Yes. If you go to deltainstitute.org, all of our reports from 2024 are all publicly available there. So you can see what we did, and the methodology as well, and the curriculum that we put together for Illinois and for Michigan. They're all there. And if there's something there that you don't find, then please reach out to Gillian or I. We're more than happy to connect.
So if we wanted to see soil health results and valuation relative to those plots, that's all there.
Soil health results definitely are. The only valuation results that you will find is us saying there is no valuation results at this time because we need more data. So it's
meaning there's no correlation between valuation and soil health.
Yeah, our early pilot programs, that was the result, is that, hey, we found all this great stuff. We can appraisers, this methodology works. They want to continue to do it, but we just need more data for appraisers to react to it in the marketplace.
Got it. Just as we wrap up, I'm curious if there's one thing you'd like to leave folks with.
I know, Patrick, you and I have talked about this, and I don't want to end on not a down note, but I want to just be realistic that we've talked about the unintended consequences possibly of this, and that, if land is being valued maybe more holistically, then the price of farmland might this might just continue to contribute to farmland, ever increasing in value, and that could inhibit land access. And so that's something that we we take very seriously, and that we're thinking about the possible unintended consequences of finding new ways to value this asset class. But one thing, just briefly, that we have kind of thought about, or maybe a possible silver lining to this, is that it also, if this does offer a possible entry point for new farmers or landowners of marginal land to improve the soil health of that land, maybe relying less on, if you're erosion prone, if you're, as most marginal land is, moving away from practices that are degrading that soil to build up that soil health. And this could possibly be a way for those operators to improve their finances. So just where we are thinking a lot about that. But
you mean long term, if soil health becomes a component of valuation, that marginal land could be more, there's an arbitrage opportunity essentially. Buy that marginal land now, improve soil health, and as soil health gets incorporated into valuation, you increase the value of that land proportionally more quickly.
That's right.
Yeah. Gillian, is there anything you want to leave folks with?
Yeah, I'll just say is that, something that we've learned throughout this entire process is that the agricultural real estate market is obviously very complicated, and it really takes all kinds. And our most valuable insights so far have usually come from getting folks of all different kinds in a room. Like Patrick, thank you again Patrick hosted a stellar panel for us at the Sustainable Agriculture Summit just a few weeks ago. And we had folks from kind of all across the agricultural real estate spectrum there as well. And the types of conversations that are being had are great to hear from our end, but also great for other people in the room. So if you want to talk to us about this, please feel free to reach out through the deltainstitute.org website. We'd love to hear from you.
Cool. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Awesome. Well, it was such a pleasure to have you both on the show. Thanks for all of your contributions. And as Patrick said, we'll be following along and very interested how things evolve.
Thank you, Sammy. Thank you, Patrick.
Thanks for listening to this episode of The Business of Soil Health. Our goal is to explore how new financial tools may or may not support producers' stewardship of their soil. We love hearing from listeners, so don't hesitate to reach out with any suggestions or guests you'd like for us to feature. And don't forget to subscribe or leave a review on your favorite podcast platform.